Welcome back to Aries 2020, the first virtual edition of the PropertyGuru Asia Real Estate Summit. For our next sessions, we will learn more about the environment pillar as one of the pillars of sustainability. Our next speaker is Angelo Tan, Green Building Country Lead in the Philippines at the International Finance Corporation World Bank. Angelo will give a case study on the democratization of green buildings and adoption of green certification programs in developing countries.
Let me teach you a popular Filipino slang word, promdi. In my country, I am what you would call a promdi, or someone who came from the provinces. The word itself came from the phrase from the provinces. From the provinces, promdi. It used to be that being called a promdi was a bit condescending in that it made you feel that you are being stereotyped as an unsophisticated person from the countryside. But over the years, its meaning has changed, probably because so many people from the provinces have made their name in Philippine society. You see, before I went to Manila, I was born and raised in a charming town in the province of La Union, which is a 4-hour drive north of Manila. La Union is popular for its beach towns and for a surfing town called San Juan. I grew up near a farm where sunshine and the smell of growing crops, animal dung, and cultivated soil were constant. On the weekends, we would catch a ride on colorful jeepneys, which are like small buses on the way to the beach for a swim. I'd say I had a very simple but happy childhood, a childhood that some city folk would call unsophisticated. But you grow up hearing of a better life in Manila, so like so many promdies, I eventually made the decision to leave the small town to go to the big city in search of a better life. It seemed like a great idea at the time. Fast forward 10 years after, and I am now a full-fledged young urban professional firmly rooted in the big city. I also just came back from Sydney, having completed my Master of Sustainable Built Environment from UNSW. Immediately after moving to my new apartment in the metro, I was required to do a 2-week quarantine, which I finished just a few days ago. My apartment is a 60 square meter, 1-bedroom unit with 2 small windows on the 40th floor of a condominium development. Gazing out of the tiny openings, I was reminded of life back in the province, where my family had once lived in a bahay kubo or nipa hut. This type of house is common in the provinces, especially in farming villages. To people from the city, this type of dwelling may look a bit awkward. But I remember, it was never really hot inside the nipa hut because it had sufficient openings for cross-ventilation, which also allowed abundant natural daylight. The roof also had a steep pitch, which separated us from the rising hot air and provided for a cooler interior. The house was elevated through stilts, which prevented floodwater from entering during typhoon season. The materials used were sustainably sourced from locally available materials such as bamboo, sawali or bamboo mats, and anahaw or palm, which are all climate-appropriate, breathable materials that needed minimal processing starting from raw material extraction all the way to construction. 14 days of isolation and reflection made me think. It seems that we promdies have figured out sustainable design to vernacular architecture long before the concept even became a fashionable one in the big cities. But things are changing in the provinces. My postgraduate thesis dealt with green building certification in the context of developing countries. And earlier this year, during a research trip to the Philippines, I got the opportunity to go out of Metro Manila, where I saw uncontrolled urban sprawl, conversion of precious agricultural land to concrete and asphalt, and unsustainable architecture totally devoid of place and context. The pressure to decongest urban areas through decentralization, a trend not only seen in the Philippines but across Asia, has resulted in the creation of new growth corridors and next wave cities. However, decentralization is much more nuanced than just identifying strategic growth areas where population is projected to spike. And what's worrying is that we are still designing and constructing our buildings like it's business as usual, which locks in inefficiencies in the real estate landscape, leading to vicious cycles that are hard to break out of, especially for a country like the Philippines, which is experiencing double exposure through rapid urbanization and climate change. IFC and the rest of the World Bank Group recognize climate change as an acute threat to global development that increases instability and contributes to poverty, fragility, and migration. Co-pollutants associated with carbon emissions are already responsible for more than 7 million premature deaths each year, while direct costs to health are estimated to be between $2.4 billion per year by 2030. Climate change could force as many as 100 million people into extreme poverty by 2030. Since the Paris Agreement was reached in December 2015, there has been a strong demand from IFC clients, low and middle income countries, for rapid, concerted action on climate change. The message from leading scientists at the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, is that there's no time to waste. The world has just under a decade to avert climate catastrophe, with the IPCC recommending a 45% reduction in emissions below 2010 levels by 2030. The amount of coal in the global electricity mix would need to be reduced to close to 0% by 2050. Moreover, according to UNEP, the building sector accounts for 39% of total energy-related carbon dioxide emissions and 36% of final energy use. Without the right choices today, high-carbon urban infrastructure will be locked in for the next 40 to 7 years. Green buildings are no longer just a trend. If we are to meet our Paris commitments, green buildings are an imperative. Towards this end, the IPCC has identified green building certification as an important pathway, and indeed, in the last decade, we've seen the rapid expansion of green building footprint. According to data presented by the World Green Building Council, many developed countries, including Australia and those in North America and South America and Europe, already have a mature green building market. However, for countries in the Global South, the uptake of green buildings has been much slower. In the Philippines, for example, the current footprint of all green buildings combined is a mere 10% of annual new construction. My country has almost 200 green buildings. However, around 90% of these are commercial buildings dominated by office towers. Around 90% are also found in Metro Manila. These insights force us to confront the questions, how about buildings in many developing countries? And where there is an increasing number of green buildings in a developing country, how do we make sure we don't leave anyone behind? In the transition to a low-carbon world, how do we become more inclusive to go beyond iconic trophy buildings? These are all very relevant questions to answer if we truly want to achieve a green building market transformation. We need to shift our focus away from just the top-tier clients and from a broader perspective, turn our attention to emerging markets. By 2060, the green building sector will double, occurring mostly in emerging markets, where a $24.7 trillion investment opportunity in green buildings now exists, according to IFC's Green Buildings Report. Two-thirds of this is in East Asia Pacific and South Asia, where more than 4 billion people are projected to live by 2030. Moreover, in the time of COVID, for developed countries, the urban environment is mostly fully built up, and retrofitting is a strategy towards increasing the footprint of green buildings. However, in developing countries, build it right the first time seems to make more sense than build back better, as these emerging cities are not fully built up yet. But democratizing green buildings is not as easy as it sounds. Developing countries face challenges that are very different from those encountered by developed countries. In Southeast Asia in particular, some of the key issues are the higher real or perceived costs for building green, lack of trained or educated green building professionals, and the perception that green buildings are for high-end developments only. For a Filipino who was given a life-changing opportunity to study abroad, taking what I learned and immigrating to a developed country in search of greener pastures seemed like a very attractive option. However, just as I was finishing my master's in Sydney, I was offered a role as the Green Building Country Lead for the Philippines by the International Finance Corporation. I feel incredibly fortunate, not only because I was able to find a job right out of graduation, especially in a time of great uncertainty when so many of my compatriots are struggling to keep their jobs, but also for the opportunity to work in an area where I can apply what I learned towards helping my country. I now manage IFC's Green Buildings program in my country, called the Green Building Market Transformation Program, which is a comprehensive approach that has 4 key strategies. Earlier in the sustainability keynote, Prashant Kapoor, our Chief Industry Specialist, talked about how this program provides investment and advisory for banks and developers. In addition to that, we also advise governments on green building codes and incentives, such as when we helped create the Philippine Green Building Code, a referral code to the National Building Code for mandatory green building compliance. But where the Philippine Green Building Code is mandatory, the other component, EDGE certification, is voluntary. This is an area where I can say that my core mandate is to democratize green buildings. In my role as Green Building Country Lead, I forge partnerships with real estate developers, investors, building professionals, certification providers, academia, and public policy makers across the Philippines towards advancing the adoption of EDGE, Excellence in Design for Greater Efficiencies. EDGE is an integrated online platform, green building standard and certification system designed to make green buildings much more accessible, affordable, and inclusive for emerging markets and developing economies such as the Philippines. EDGE presents 3 key innovations needed to create a large-scale adoption of green building standards in developing countries. These are: first, it simplifies assessment criteria, which therefore reduces the time and cost to meet the standard. Second, it has a sharp focus on areas of intensive resource use in buildings, which are energy consumption, water consumption, and materials consumption. If a project can demonstrate at least 20% efficiency for each of these resource areas, then it can be certified with EDGE. And third, it provides a free, integrated, cloud-based tool which recommends cost-effective solutions to make building design and construction green. This use of PropTech has led to the seamless integration of sustainable practices in the design and construction of buildings. And through a free tool called the EDGE app, we are able to encourage the greater participation of developing countries towards creating more green buildings. The following video shows how a project can achieve the EDGE standard.
Welcome. In this video, you will learn how to meet the EDGE standard. The EDGE standard requires that a project reach at least 20% less energy, water, and embodied energy and materials compared to a base case building. Let's get started. First, we need to sign in or register to become a user of the free EDGE app. To get started, we need to select the building typology from the menu on the left. Let's choose Homes. We're going to design a resource-efficient apartment building in Ecuador. Now, enter the project and sub-project details. Under the Location Data section, choose the country, city, and income category for our project. Now we'll enter our building data to begin designing our base case, such as the number of floors and the expected occupancy per unit. You will notice that the default values for space allocation appear in the middle column. Enter the relevant data for our project in the column on the right. Select whether our building will provide an AC or heating system at the time of construction. Below the Building System section, open Key Assumptions. Review and adjust the assumptions as needed. Take note that documentation will need to be provided for any changes. The cost defaults show the averages for our selected country. For accurate projections, review each cost carefully. We've now designed our base case building. Let's move on to the Energy tab to begin designing our resource-efficient building. The project's base case reflects the building's energy use before any design selections have been made. Our improved case will change once we select energy efficiency measures. As our apartment does not include AC or space heating, virtual energy reflects the eventual energy required for thermal comfort. Select energy efficiency measures and compare their costs and impacts instantly. Here, enter specific details for each measure, such as the solar photovoltaics percentage of annual electricity use. Any changes made will override the suggested improved case in the name of the measure. Click on the name of the measure to learn more. From there, access the EDGE user guide for more in-depth information on the measure. After reaching at least 20% energy savings, let's move on to the Water tab. First, select water efficiency measures and then enter the specific details for each measure. Certain water measures positively impact energy savings if related to the heating of water. Let's proceed to the Materials tab. This section calculates the amount of energy required in making the construction materials for the building. We're required to enter information for each materials category. Select materials from the drop-down menus. If the project has more than one material for any of the categories, use the proportion field. Next, select a material for wall insulation. This is required as we selected external wall insulation as an energy efficiency measure. To see the baseline assumptions, such as for the floor slabs, click on the name of the category. Here, alter the thickness and steel rebar as needed. Our building has met the EDGE standard and at over 40% energy savings can be certified as EDGE Advanced. Let's check on our incremental cost and payback period. Our results tell us that each unit costs an additional $703.76 and takes less than 2 years to pay back through utility savings. The projected utility cost reduction of $30 per unit is the value that can be marketed to home buyers through the EDGE certification. Once we save our project, we're ready to register for certification.
Earlier, I mentioned about how EDGE certification plays an important role for achieving green certification for developments in provinces outside of Metro Manila. This is not limited to private sector projects. The new Clark City development, a 9,450-hectare mixed-use development located in Tarlac, which is a 2-hour drive north of Manila, broke ground in 2015. The development is being managed and overseen by Bases Conversion and Development Authority, or BCDA, the state-owned firm that converts former military bases and properties into economic hubs with the help of the private sector, and whose portfolio includes what is now known as the Bonifacio Global City, or BGC. Being outside the capital but well within major industry and agricultural centers and well connected through major infrastructure projects, New Clark City is poised to become the next big metropolis. It is envisioned to be a destination where nature, lifestyle and business, education, and industry converge into a global city based on principles of sustainability. Serving as the premier international gateway to New Clark City, the Clark International Airport is one of the flagship projects in the new Aerotropolis and Investment Center. In December 2019, the new and modern passenger terminal achieved its EDGE preliminary certification as the second airport in the world to be certified as such. Celebrating Filipino culture, landscape, and ingenuity through a modern architecture, the new passenger terminal maximized the use of glulam wood for its roof structure, one of only a handful in the world. With its wave-like form reminiscent of the Zambales mountain range, the roof's biophilic design combines aesthetics and stability to withstand a Category 5 hurricane. Clark International Airport will start operations by 2021 with an annual capacity of 8 million passengers, easing the congestion in Manila's Ninoy Aquino International Airport. The project features various sustainability features leading up to 24% energy efficiency, 29% water efficiency, and 55% less embodied energy in material per the EDGE standard. Earlier today, Prashant mentioned how Arthaland's flagship office development in the country, Arthaland Century Pacific Tower, became the first in the world to achieve EDGE Zero Carbon certification, truly a major achievement for a developing country. EDGE Zero Carbon is awarded for projects that have achieved at least 40% for energy efficiency and continue to offset 100% of operational emissions, which Arthaland Century Pacific Tower has accomplished by sourcing its energy through hydroelectric power. Per the EDGE standard, this office tower has demonstrated 45% energy savings, 64% water savings, and 34% less embodied energy in materials compared to a baseline building. Some of the advanced features for energy are sensible heat recovery from exhaust, occupancy and daylight photoelectric sensors, and off-site renewable procurement. For water, the building has condensate water recovery, rainwater harvesting, and grain water recycling. Like Imperial Homes, Arthaland has also taken on the challenge for a portfolio certification approach and has been working towards replicating their success in EDGE Zero Carbon by also certifying their Cebu Exchange Office Tower in Cebu IT Park, Savia Financial Center, a premium mid-rise development in Taguig, and their mixed-use development in Laguna, Savina Park. IFC's work in integrating PropTech in climate business does not end with green buildings and EDGE certification. We know that truly sustainable buildings also have to be resilient to natural hazards. After all, what's the use of lowering the embodied energy and resource use of a building if it's destroyed by a natural hazard well before the end of its predicted lifespan? Throughout my talk so far, I've made references to various disasters confronting the Philippines. Indeed, the Philippines is a hotspot for disasters resulting from natural hazards, with significant hazard levels for floods, typhoons, landslides, tsunamis, earthquakes, and volcanoes. According to a report released by the United Nations Office of Disaster Risk Reduction and Center for Research on the Epidemiology of Disasters, the Philippines has the fourth highest number of disaster events linked to natural hazards globally in the last 20 years. In terms of exposure to key natural hazards and social vulnerability in the form of the population's susceptibility and their capacity for coping and adaptation as assessed through the World Risk Index of the United Nations University Institute for Environment and Human Security, the Philippines has consistently ranked within the top 10 countries with the highest disaster risk. Having had the professional and academic exposure to other green building rating systems, I know that pushing the boundaries of what is truly sustainable is an important effort. However, I believe it is also important to level the playing field so that everyone can participate. By being more inclusive, we lead the effort towards a catalytic critical mass, therefore, a market transformation. Eventually, we're able to redefine what is considered a baseline for every country, allowing everyone to elevate the standards of building design and construction. Our work at the International Finance Corporation will continue to play a leadership role in the global transition to a low-carbon path by democratizing building sustainability and resilience. Towards this end, central to our mandate is making sure that we encourage the greater participation of emerging markets, which are expanding at a very fast pace to keep up with high population growth and rapid urbanization, most of which is happening in East Asia Pacific and South Asia. Emerging markets, despite having ambitious targets for green and resilient buildings, struggle to put in place effective measures to mandate and incentivize large-scale adoption of green building construction and resilient practices. However, emerging markets can be shaped by progressive developers that demonstrate a proof of concept and pave the way for others to follow. In the absence of comprehensive policies and practices mandating and incentivizing green and resilient construction, voluntary commitments and actions by these players have been highly critical. Join us and take the challenge. Through the integration of PropTech through tools such as Excellence in Design for Greater Efficiencies or EDGE and Building Resilience Index or BRI, we can make sustainable, resilient, and affordable buildings much more accessible and inclusive for everyone.